Hello everyone and welcome to this edition of the Middle East Today, coming to you from Beirut. I'm Maryam Saleh. An estimated 1,600 to 2,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails continue an open-ended mass hunger strike, which began on April 17th to protest against Israel's administrative detention rules, the use of solitary confinement and maltreatment of sick detainees. The International Committee of the Red Cross has called for hospitalization of 6 Palestinian hunger strikers who are being held in Israeli prisons. The Israeli group, also Physicians for Human Rights, has condemned the court's decision of turning down an appeal requesting the release of 2 prisoners who began their hunger strike back in February. Now, protests in support of the prisoners continue in Gaza and the West Bank, while many have criticized the Arab League for not taking this matter to the United Nations Security Council. Now, to get more on what's happening to the prisoners right now, I am joined by Professor Mohsen Saleh from the Zaytuna Center for Studies. He's joining me here in Beirut. I'm also joined by Ms. Karen Gold, journalist, joining us via satellite in London. We're also joined by Mr. Isam Yunus, director of Al Mizan Center for Human Rights. He's joining us from Gaza. And let me begin with you, Mr. Yunus. Since you're following up the issue, we heard from the Red Cross saying that the prisoners are in imminent danger of death. What can you tell us about their situation?
I think the situation is very complicated and very difficult at the moment. Now we are counting not by days, by hours and minutes. Prisoners are now in their hunger strike. So far, the Israeli service, the Israeli prison service, did not respond positively to their legitimate demands. Their health conditions are very difficult, very complicated, and I think there are all reasons to be worried about their situation. And I'm saying that as long as there isn't that international intervention to put an end for the Israeli unlawful, unhuman treatment vis-à-vis the prisoners, I think the worst yet to come. And we are very afraid that the next hours will be of significant consequence on the prisoners' lives in the Israeli prisons.
Yes, well, can you tell us about most of these prisoners, their situation? Were most of them taken prisoner after they were released, with the latest prisoner swap between Hamas and Israel, or were these people that were still in jails for the past few years and continue to be there under administrative detention?
Yes, I mean, now back to the question why prisoners went in a hunger strike. I think it's very clear. There are policies that cannot be tolerated anymore by the Palestinian prisoners. Prisoners have gained some basics that were a result of a direct struggle by them all the years long of their detention in the Israeli prisons. The policy of administrative detention, which is detaining Palestinians without any charges, is a very notorious policy and it cannot be tolerated anymore. And Palestinian prisoners has decided not to tolerate it and to accept it anymore. So many of the Palestinians are administratively detained. Many are in solitary confinement. They were isolated from other colleagues, other prisoners, and they live in a very dire conditions in the Israeli prisons. Palestinian prisoners from Gaza were denied visits for the last 7 years by their families, by their relatives. They did not even pay any single visit. The conditions in general are very complicated, and there are many prisoners who are either some of them has been rearrested by the Israelis, those who were released in the recent swab, the Shalit swab. Many of the prisoners are in a very serious health conditions, suffer from many illnesses. And that's why I'm saying the situation is very, very difficult and cannot be tolerated. And we're talking about violations of basic principles of international law and violation of the minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners, the United Nations minimum standards. The situation is very serious. That's why, again, I'm saying now hours are very serious, minutes are very serious, and we count it on that level.
Yes, of course. Before I come back to our studio, let me ask Ms. Gold about the issue of administrative detention specifically. Israel upholds a British colonial law which existed back then, that they have the right to detain Palestinians without trial or charge. Why does Israel keep this law specifically against Palestinians?
Yes, you refer to a very, very old law, which goes back to the time of the Mandate, which was actually used against Jewish settlers, against the Jews who were trying to make a home in Israel. And the British authorities cracked down on Jewish settlers many, many times using the facility of administrative detention. Eventually this led to the bombing of the King David Hotel, although there were many other reasons for that. I think it is a great tragedy that earlier this week Benjamin Netanyahu called elections, as would in any democracy, I put that in quotes, and suddenly yesterday he announced there isn't going to be an election, and he's formed a coalition with Shaul Mofaz, the former defense minister, and there won't be elections until the end of 2013. This is the action of someone who has no interest in democracy. I have said whenever I've been on these programs on PressTV and in other places that Israel has the most right-wing government that it has ever had in its history. It's even more right-wing than the government of Ariel Sharon, who after all cleared the Jewish settlers out of Gaza. But now that we have the Netanyahu government in place, with no possibility of the left or labor or any liberal group within Israel to have a voice, then I don't see us having any end to administrative detention. There are human rights groups in Israel, including Israeli human rights groups like B'Tselem, and of course the International Committee of the Red Cross, who are insisting that this administrative detention be ended. And in fact, even Justices Rubinstein, Solberg, and Danziger, who are the three justices who said that these prisoners may not be released, have said that the government has to reform the whole system, because these prisoners are not even being allowed someone to visit them, to talk to them about the adjudication. The Israeli government is using the excuse that it's a violation of national security for these issues to be discussed. But these issues can be discussed in camera, they can be discussed in private, but at least give the prisoners a chance to have a voice and for them to be represented. And I'm afraid that this is a situation that is just as bad as what many people describe at Guantanamo Bay, the United States detention of people for 8 to 10 years, 10, 12 years, in Guantanamo Bay without a proper trial. So I'm afraid the Israel and the United States do not come out looking very well in this situation.
Yes, let me ask Professor Mr. Mohsen Salah, do you think that this is related to specifically the time of Benjamin Netanyahu, that there can be no reform, if we may say, on this specific issue?
Well, generally speaking, this is consistent in the Israeli policy since the occupation of Palestine in, dealing with the Palestinian prisoners, especially with this case of administrative detention. It is chronic in their policies since the occupation. So, let me say also one word. Yes, this policy was used by the British, but it was mostly used against the Palestinian nationalists who were calling for their freedom and establishing a Palestinian state, not only for some few Jews, which we have some few cases at that time. Also for the second case here, this policy was used by Likud Party, by the Labour Party, by the coalition. So it is a general, consistent Israeli policy which was used by all. And we have all over the time we have hundreds of Palestinian prisoners under such a rule, this administrative detention. Nowadays we have almost 300, but maybe at the times of the labor or the Likud we have few hundreds every time, or for the last 20 or 25 years. So it is a general consistent policy of the Israelis.
Don't you think it might somehow backfire and blow up in Israel's face as long as it's getting bigger, it's getting more intense? Although we still don't have a lot of words from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and so on, and their stances are not that harsh, but people are getting angrier inside Palestine.
Well, just for information, for this policy, maybe the world will not hear about the Palestinian sufferance inside the Israeli jails unless the Palestinians go for such hunger strike or these things. But this very policy is being used since occupation since 1967, and all the suffering is there. Not only this kind of administrative detention, but even with torture. Mostly 90% of Palestinians are being tortured in the Israeli jails under all sorts of Israeli governments, and we have this, with many evidences about that. We have hundreds of children, women, and so on. So we have all the cases of kind of torture which goes against the 4th Geneva Convention, the 3rd Geneva Convention, and all the international standards of human rights when dealing with prisoners. So, in fact, we have Palestinians under occupation. This occupation is cruel. Is not dealing with people based on human rights, and in such case we have very, very big sufferance. Unfortunately, we have the support of USA and some Western countries to such Israeli policies, in which people cannot hear in the right way about the real sufferance of Palestinians in the jails. We have nowadays we have more than 4,300 Palestinians who are still in the Israeli jails.
All right, let me go back to Mr. Yunus in Gaza. What hope do the prisoners have of being released if they continue their hunger strike?
Let me return a little bit back to the British mandate regulations of 1949. I think it's very important to highlight the fact that those regulations were the occupiers' laws and were revoked when the British Army left Palestine in the year 1949. And the Israelis continued to use those laws, those extraordinary laws, those emergency laws against the Palestinians, the house demolitions, administrative detention, etc. This policy or these regulations were adopted before the adoption of the Geneva Convention, the Geneva Conventions of 1949. So they are before the Geneva Conventions, namely the fourth Convention relative to the protection of civilian persons. It's in clear contradiction with the Geneva Convention. It lacks and violates basic principles of international law. So they are illegal. Whether the Israelis would claim that they are implementing what the British has left in Palestine, the emergency laws, they are not anymore. In theory, they are should not be implemented. In practice, they are in violation of basic principles, and Geneva Convention is the key treaty that regulates the relation between the occupiers and the occupied. This is one thing. Second, Israel, all the years long, have violated the Geneva Convention when it comes to its relation with the prisoners. First, Israel is the only country, I think, in the world that would legalize torture as a state policy. The what's so-called physical or moderate physical pressure that was adopted by the Landau Commission in 1987 is exactly what is meant by Article 1 of the United Nations Convention against Torture, when it identified torture to be any act that would cause severe pain, whether it's mental or physical. And physical, what's so-called moderate physical pressure is in fact torture. So Israel is a state that legalizes torture. This is one